The sound of the heavy car tires gripping the loose gravel was deafening in the quiet of the evening, but it was nothing compared to the frantic, thumping heartbeat in the small puppy's chest. He didn't understand why the vehicle had suddenly stopped in this desolate, industrial wasteland miles away from the warm carpets and soft blankets he had known for his short life. The heavy metal door swung open with a harsh creak. A rough pair of hands reached in, grabbed him without a shred of gentleness, and set him down onto the cold, oily dirt. Before he could even whine, before his small nose could process the sharp chemical smells of the air, the door slammed shut. The engine roared, tires spun, and the car sped away, disappearing into the dimming light. A thick cloud of dust and the choking scent of exhaust fumes were his only goodbyes. The puppy stood completely frozen as the dust settled around him. His name, given to him by a fleeting, distant memory of human kindness, was Leo. He was a tiny, scruffy retriever mix, barely 10 weeks old. His fur was a beautiful golden honey color, marked by a very distinct, bright white stripe running vertically from his forehead all the way down to his wet nose. He had white fur on all 4 of his small paws, making it look as though he were wearing little socks. But right now, those white paws were trembling violently against the freezing, oily ground. The world around him was vast, alien, and utterly terrifying. Massive, rusted metal beams towered into the gray sky like the skeletal remains of forgotten giants. Discarded truck tires lay in massive, dark piles, like slumbering beasts waiting in the shadows. The late autumn wind began to howl, whining a lonely song through the broken glass windows of an abandoned warehouse nearby. Leo let out a soft, high-pitched whimper, but the vast, empty silence of the junkyard instantly swallowed the sound. Hunger was the first brutal reality to set in. His stomach twisted into tight, painful knots. Leo began to wander cautiously, his white paws stepping carefully over jagged rocks and shattered glass. He sniffed desperately around a torn, faded fast food bag caught in some weeds, but found only the ghost of a scent and a few hardened crumbs. Cold was the second reality. As the afternoon sun began to dip below the jagged horizon, it painted the sky in dark, angry bruises of deep purple and gray. The temperature plummeted sharply, turning the damp air into tiny, biting needles against his skin. He desperately needed to find shelter before the night fully claimed the junkyard. He began to trot toward a massive pile of rotting wooden pallets stacked near a crumbling brick wall, hoping the narrow gaps might offer a tiny corner to hide from the wind. That is exactly when he heard it. It wasn't the creaking of the rusted metal, and it wasn't the howling of the autumn wind. It was a cry. It was a high-pitched, desperate, scraping sound of sheer distress. A sound so small and fragile that it barely registered over the ambient noise of the wasteland. Yet it stopped. Leo dead in his tracks. He tilted his golden head, his floppy ears perking up to maximum attention. He listened intently. The sound came again, slightly weaker this time, echoing from beneath a massive, warped and overturned metal dumpster a few yards away. Leo approached, the heavy metal structure with extreme caution, his tail tucked tightly between his legs. The smell of old rust and stale water grew stronger. He lowered his belly to the freezing ground and sniffed the dark, narrow gap underneath the heavy steel edge. There, huddled in the absolute deepest, wettest shadow, was a tiny creature. It was an orphaned domestic kitten so incredibly small that she was barely the size of Leo's own paw. She was a calico kitten, her fur a striking mix of distinct orange, black, and white patches. Her face was mostly pure white, except for a perfect natural circle of bright orange fur that completely surrounded her left eye, giving her a uniquely beautiful appearance. Her wide, terrified eyes were a brilliant, milky blue-green, shining with unspeakable fear in the darkness. The tiny kitten was sitting directly in a puddle of freezing mud, shivering so violently that her teeth chattered. But the worst part was her back leg. She was hopelessly tangled in a thick, tough knot of discarded industrial packing twine, tethering her to a heavy metal spike driven into the dirt. She was trapped, freezing, and entirely alone. Leo didn't see an entirely different species, He didn't see a stranger. He looked into the freezing mud and saw a shared loneliness. Without a single moment of hesitation, the golden puppy pushed his face into the narrow gap and used his white-socked front paws to dig frantically at the oily dirt and sharp debris blocking his way. Dirt flew backward as he squeezed his head and shoulders completely under the heavy steel. He let out a gentle, soothing whine, trying to tell the terrified creature that he wasn't there to hurt her. The tiny calico kitten hissed weakly, flattening her ears, but she had absolutely no energy left to fight. Leo gently nudged her wet, freezing cheek with his warm nose. This was the defining moment for the young dog. He could have easily backed out, turned around, and continued his search for a dry, safe place for himself. He could have left the weaker, dying creature behind to save his own life as the temperature dropped toward freezing. But the brave little golden puppy refused. He shifted his body in the mud, opened his mouth, and began to use his tiny puppy teeth to gnaw directly at the tough, dirty packing twine. It was thick and tasted metallic and bitter. It took immense effort, and he had to be incredibly careful not to bite the kitten's frail, freezing leg. The wind outside grew much colder, slicing through his scruffy fur, but he persisted, chewing and pulling with all his might. Finally, with a soft snap, the thick twine broke apart. The kitten pulled her leg back. She was free, but the ordeal was not over. The tiny calico kitten was far too weak, exhausted, and hypothermic to walk. When Leo tried to gently nudge her forward out from under the dumpster, she simply collapsed back into the freezing mud, her eyes half closing. Leo stood over her, looking back out at the rapidly darkening, dangerous industrial yard. A fierce, ancient instinct awakened inside his young heart. He lowered his head, carefully opened his mouth, and gently took hold of the loose skin at the back of the kitten's neck, the scruff. He had only ever seen his mother do this, and his movements were clumsy, but he was incredibly gentle. With a firm grip, he lifted the tiny, limp calico kitten out of the mud. Carrying her securely in his mouth, the golden puppy with the white face stripe stepped out from under the dumpster and began the slow, treacherous walk across the freezing junkyard, determined to find a place where they could both survive the night. The golden puppy carried the tiny calico kitten through the labyrinth of rusted metal and broken glass until he found it, a massive, discarded concrete sewer pipe lying partially buried in the gravel. It was dry inside, and the thick concrete walls blocked the bitter autumn wind. Leo walked deep into the dark cylinder and gently lowered the kitten onto the hard, rough floor. The tiny calico, utterly exhausted, immediately curled into a tight, freezing ball. Leo did not hesitate. He lay down on the cold concrete right beside her and used his nose to pull her tiny body completely against his chest, wrapping his scruffy golden fur around her to block out the cold. He spent the next 3 hours in the dark, using his warm tongue to vigorously lick the freezing mud from her white, orange, and black fur, cleaning her exactly as a mother would. By midnight, a miraculous sound echoed softly in the concrete pipe. A deep rhythmic vibration started in the kitten's chest. She was purring. It was the only victory they needed that night. The days that followed forged a bond between them that was stronger than iron. Leo became the absolute guardian. He decided to name the brave little kitten Luna. Their days were entirely consumed by the desperate, continuous hunt for survival. When Leo managed to find a small pool of rainwater gathered inside a filthy, discarded rubber tire, he always stepped back and allowed Luna to drink first, watching over her carefully. When he found a half-eaten, stale piece of bread near the chalky edge of the property, he didn't devour it. He carried it all the way back to the concrete pipe, dropping it on the ground and using his nose to push the softer inside pieces toward the kitten, taking only the tough, dirty crusts for himself. In return, Luna brought him deep comfort. When the nights were terrifyingly dark and the strange noises of the junkyard made Leo tremble, Luna would press her small face against his white facial stripe, purring loudly, reminding him that he was not fighting this battle alone, but their fragile existence was about to be tested. Winter arrived early, and it arrived with absolute fury. The crisp autumn air was violently replaced by a biting frost, and soon, heavy, relentless snow began to fall. The dark industrial yard was quickly buried under a thick, blinding blanket of white. The temperature inside the concrete pipe dropped, below freezing, turning the walls into blocks of ice. The freezing concrete pulled the heat right out of their small bodies. Leo knew with a dreadful certainty that if they stayed in the pipe, they would simply freeze to death in their sleep. He remembered smelling something a few days prior, a faint scent of warm, soapy air coming from the side of a functional brick warehouse on the far side of the lot. It was a massive risk to cross the open, snowy expanse, but to stay was a guaranteed end. They set out just after dawn. The snowfall was blinding. The golden puppy walked first, acting as a snowplow. His small body had to push violently through the deep, heavy snowdrifts, creating a narrow, jagged path. Luna, the tiny calico kitten, followed directly behind him, carefully stepping her tiny paws exactly into the larger snowy footprints Leo left behind, a vibrant splash of orange, black, and white moving through a perfectly white world. They were halfway across the open yard when disaster struck. The wind shifted, carrying a terrifying scent. Leo froze, the golden fur on his back standing straight up. Emerging from the snowy shadows of a rusted crane was a massive, heavily scarred feral dog. The beast was hungry, desperate, and its wild eyes locked immediately onto the two small, vulnerable animals struggling in the snow. The large dog lowered its head and let out a guttural, bone-chilling growl that echoed across the yard. Leo was terrified. His legs shook and his heart hammered against his ribs, but the tiny calico kitten was directly behind him. The golden puppy stepped forward, shielding Luna completely with his body. He arched his back, planting his 4 white paws firmly in the snow, and stared directly into the eyes of the massive predator. From deep within his small chest, Leo let out a surprisingly loud, deep, and ferocious bark. It was a sound of absolute defiance. He bared his small puppy teeth, making it incredibly clear that whoever wanted to touch the kitten behind him would have to kill him first. Luna huddled shivering beneath Leo's belly, her wide blue-green eyes watching. The large feral dog stopped. It analyzed the situation. It saw the sheer, unbending willpower in the golden puppy's eyes. Deciding that a meal wasn't worth the vicious fight this crazy little dog was promising, the feral dog turned away and disappeared back into the freezing white shadows. Leo did not stop shaking, but he did not stop walking. They finally reached the brick wall of the warehouse, and there it was. A large, rusted metal vent blowing a continuous stream of glorious, warm, soapy-smelling steam from the building's heating system. The 2 exhausted animals collapsed onto the dry concrete directly in front of the grate. The hot air melted the ice from their fur. They huddled tightly together, finally experiencing the sensation of true warmth. The puppy who refused to leave. The kitten behind had saved them both. The following morning, a warehouse worker named Sarah stepped outside the side door for her morning coffee break. The snow had stopped, leaving the world quiet and bright. As she walked past the heating vent, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, sleeping peacefully on the hard concrete, was a scruffy golden honey puppy with a bright white stripe down his face. And nestled safely under his chin, purring softly, was a tiny calico kitten with a perfect circle of orange fur around her left eye. The kitten was gently licking the puppy's ear. The sight was so profoundly moving that tears immediately welled in Sarah's eyes. She slowly took off her thick winter gloves, fetched a clean cardboard box and a warm wool blanket from her car, and approached them. When her gentle hands reached down to lift them, Leo woke up startled, instantly looking for Luna. But Sarah scooped them both up together, wrapping them tightly in the soft wool. As they were carried into the heated building, the cold, the hunger, and the terror of the junkyard faded into a distant nightmare. They were abandoned no longer. They had survived the impossible entirely because a brave little dog decided that nobody, no matter how small, deserved to be left in the cold.